Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today at this webinar that we're holding in collaboration with NTT Data. My name is Kerry Jones. You may know me. I'm the editor of Supply Management. I'll be your host for this webinar today, which will be a discussion session. Today, we'll be talking about the rising cost of energy, soaring costs of commodities, and the immense strains that these are placing on supply networks. Of course, that's affecting availability of materials and creating a situation of unpredictability. In response, procurement teams are trying to expand supplier bases, reduce risk and dependency, but I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't already know there. So today, the session is specifically for businesses that use SAP as their core enterprise solution. So we'll be assessing how integrating a supplier portal with the SAP platform can help improve collaboration, quality management, and accountability as well for direct spend suppliers. So that's our focus today. For anyone watching us live, please do submit your questions, any comments that you have as they come to you. There should be a spot just below the video if you can find that. We'll come to those at the end of the session and get through as many questions as we can. So please do use that function. The webinar is being recorded. If you have to drop out, if you have to miss anything, then you can come back and view it again later. And you can also share it with people that you think might be applicable to them as well. Please do. Okay, well, today I am thrilled to introduce our two speakers that we have with us. Thank you so much. We have Merten Schüler. Merten is IT Manager for Procurement and Maintenance Solutions at Nexperia. Merten, would you like to say hello and just introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, and greetings from a home office location somewhere near Hamburg in Germany. So thank you, Sari. My name is indeed Merten. Been with Nexperia since the start, which is only about 5.5 years ago. But before that, also about a decade with the previous company that we spun out to. I maybe explain a bit more later when we do the details. Yeah, great. Glad to be with you today.
Thank you. We also have Jon Brooks. Jon is the Customer Experience Director from NTT Data Business Solutions. Good morning, Jon.
Good morning, and good morning, everyone. As said, I'm Jon Brooks. I guess my current role is more around business development at NTT, so that involves a lot of pre-sales activities. I am a techie at heart. I've been working with SAP predominantly from about 1999. I failed to earn my fortune fixing the Millennium Bug. So I continued to work as an end user in SAP till about 2010, at which point, alongside a colleague, we set up an SAP consultancy business, working exclusively with SAP clients focused on digital engagements and commerce. So I'd like to say I've spent a lot of time both as an end user, focused on my own business requirements and priorities, as well as then as a consultant focused on our customers' priorities. So that covers both the order to cash and predominantly today the procure to pay process. Probably just before we get into it, just to say my role, I guess, is just to share some insights into what we're seeing across our customer base. That covers many industries in procurement. So I'll talk a bit more generally. A key theme is where we're seeing the actions to combat prices, either through the supply chain or internally within your own departments. And I'll try to point those things out as we talk today. But what I will say finally is just to say, very pleased and grateful for Merten taking the time to join. And although my bits will probably be a bit boring, please make good use of the Q&A to ask Merten questions. I'm sure he's seen and done some of the things that you guys are thinking about, and he'll effectively give you that customer truth. So thanks again, Merten, for that.
Wonderful, thank you. And yeah, before we do get to Merten, I just want to stick with you, Jon. Nothing general, as you said, but just to dig into some of those challenges that procurement teams are experiencing at the moment, especially as you do have that site over quite a lot of different industries and sectors. So obviously everyone's been under the claw of a lot of different global events. Can you give us a bit of an overview of the kind of things that you're seeing affecting businesses at the moment?
Yeah, I can certainly give my experiences of what I'm hearing. So like you say, I think it's fair to say that the last few years have brought a whole new set of challenges within the supply chains. There's no doubt that the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the rising cost of energy, for example, have impacted all areas of society. But if you look specifically at how these events have impacted supply chains and the list of considerations they've caused, it's been pretty significant. You know, some of the most damaging to point out will be the disruption to logistics, production delays, and of course the uncertainty in access to the labour markets, which for us guys based in the UK has been probably been more significant than the rest of Europe, for example. But all these things mean that the effective management of supply chains is more difficult than ever, and those circumstances are continuously changing as well. You know, in an arena where visibility, predictability, and reliability are key foundations to success, the events of the last few years have undoubtedly introduced circumstances which have increased that uncertainty and disruption, and it's also reduced clarity. So I guess finally we can safely assume there'll be other unforeseen challenges ahead, such as the chaotic nature of life, and maybe topically the chaotic nature of governments. Thanks,
Thank you very much. I think, yeah, that's a really good framework to look at the extent of the problems that, I mean, and I'm sure this isn't, you know, news to anyone, but, you know, yeah, the depth and breadth of the issues being faced. But so then, you know, continuing on from that, in what ways are you seeing people actually tackling those challenges? Because, you know, there's a lot of commonalities there.
Well, I guess from a procurement team specific perspective, you know, I think it's also fair to say that they're not ignoring the realities of what they're facing. They're actively looking for solutions to address those challenges. However, I do think they're mindful not to just look for quick wins, but instead look for solutions which provide both that short, medium, and long-term benefit, mainly to maximize the return on investment. I'm sure the guys that are listening today have responsibilities, they have set budgets, and those things need to have the right governance in place in order to make any investments. So even once the specific challenges of the last few years diminish, it is important that the solutions that we look at or put in place today are still returning value for the investment that we made. You know, I guess in some cases, these current events have acted as a catalyst in investigating and introducing new ways of working, or most prominently, the introduction of technology, just that ensures their organizations and supply chains are fit for 2022 and indeed future-proofed. And I guess when I say future-proofed, I mean dealing with challenges that will remain in the constant in the supply chain. So not necessarily the things that we're talking about that are specific to the last few years that can be associated one-off global events, but these are topics that, you know, Merten and the guys have to constantly face, the challenges that they continually need to address ongoing, and maybe I'll touch on that shortly. But just going back to maybe what I see our customers doing, yes, some already had effectively digital transformation strategies in place, which was to improve the overall engagement with both customers and vendors, I guess. So it did include supply chain solutions, and maybe they've been adjusted slightly to cope with the specific demands of these one-off events. And we do see evidence of these scenarios in many conversations we have with our customers, and within those projects that help supply chains to work smarter and more efficiently, maybe just in recent times they've been made a priority over other areas of the business as well. So I guess in summary, that I'm seeing lots of things go on. There is a common theme, probably that acceleration of digital transformation, where they feel that technology can help.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, like you said, let's not forget, there are an unusual series of one-off global events, but actually those other events that are always challenges that are always going to be there in the background for procurement and supply chain teams are equally as important to focus on. Whether that is talent and staff retention or managing data, things like that. Do you have any examples of those issues that you're seeing, especially among customers?
Yes. I mean, you've touched on a couple there, but yeah, a lot of this stuff is repeated across. Well, these things aren't industry specific. You guys all experience the same challenges. The purchasing teams, procurement experts. Excuse me. There's probably many good examples I can give, but let's maybe just talk about some themes. The challenges associated with the expansion within supply chain. So that's introducing new vendors, maybe dealing with specialist products. How can you increase the breadth of your vendor count without simultaneously and maybe exponentially increasing your internal management and admin costs? So again, maybe the theme of this is how do we keep costs down? Well, if you're looking around for new suppliers and taking them on board, then that inherently has an internal cost to manage those things. And therefore, maybe we shy away from those things. How do you ensure that your valued workforce stays motivated? How do we ensure we're using every ounce of the expertise that these guys have and avoid wasting the time on non-value add activities? Predominantly administration and data processing is what I see out in the field. How do we increase collaboration with our vendors? And that really means how do we maintain a close relationship with them? How do we work smarter with them? How do we avoid radio silence, as we say, which can cause maybe some supply delays and such like? How can we make sure that every stakeholder who is making decisions about procurement are basing those decisions on accurate information? How do we ensure that information is current? How do we make sure it's shared amongst multiple people who are making those decisions? And I guess finally, another theme probably goes back to what I said is a constant challenge. How do we continually review and improve vendor performance, both for our benefit and theirs? Those guys want to stay suppliers of ours, so we've got to make sure that their performance is up to scratch and not a service we can improve by going elsewhere. So these are the real issues, I think, that present constant challenges to the customers and their procurement teams. But I do think that those teams have got ideas of how to tackle those challenges as well. They're not sitting around waiting for somebody to help them out. They want to work smarter. They want to more efficiently tackle their immediate and ongoing challenges and not just apply additional manpower. I don't think that's the right way to approach it. And obviously that just increases cost. And I guess in light of that, they do get that leveraging technology is undoubtedly an approach that is worthwhile taking. Organizations know that visibility through the supply chain is unbelievably important. I guess day by day, they're checking purchase orders, they're making sure delivery dates are on time. That's a kind of repetitive task that we see. But they know that in times of uncertainty, it is more important than ever to have that visibility. And without it, they're making decisions with, uninformed decisions. They're basing it on assumption rather than fact. And these decisions in turn will then have that knock-on effect to every corner of their organization and ultimately the service they provide to customers. So it's no surprise, as I said, that I think technology can come in here. It can be leveraged to provide that visibility that they require and have that positive impact. It'll help combat that increased cost in managing the supply chain, especially the internal costs that I've said, and it'll just make sure incorrect decisions are not made that then impact purchasing cost. I guess also, the supply chain of any organization includes lots of different suppliers. So all various shapes and sizes. They have their own processes, they have their own systems, they have their own preferred methods of communication, be it modern day automated communication or connections, if you like, maybe some more traditional EDI, maybe older email exchanges, for example. And of course, that creates an additional problem, as it means that we can't follow a standardized process in terms of maybe collecting data and sharing that data from suppliers and ensuring it's quickly moved across locations, systems, where everybody who can see it can. And of course, as I mentioned before, it's equally important that there is a single view of that truth, so that everybody's working based on the same data. You know, as I mentioned before, the stakeholders need real-time information. So just going back to my point about these guys aren't, rather than letting that continue, we are seeing an ever-growing trend amongst our customers and organizations to provide, online platforms, digital engagement solutions that resolves this issue for the purchasing teams. And it can form part of this overall digital strategy, even if maybe at this time it is just a point solution. I'll just take a breath there, I think.
No, thank you. That's a very comprehensive view. No, I think you're right there. There's so many different things, and people are looking for different solutions for those. So if I can bring Merten in at this point, does that ring true for your experience at Nexperia? And why did you take on this journey?
Yeah, so I think certainly we can echo that. So maybe to add a bit onto my initial introduction. So I'm representing our IT department. So I'm the inside IT, the solution owner for our purchasing and also maintenance solutions. So I'm not a member of procurement, but of course I help them together with my team to deal with projects and challenges that are relating to our IT strategy. Nexperia is a fairly young company, so we only entered the market on this logo 5.5 years ago. Behind there's a much longer history. So some of our sites are, of course, decades ago created by former companies that we spun out of in the end. We have a global presence manufacturing semiconductors with big presences in Europe and in the Far East, where we have major factories in both of these areas in the globe. And that, of course, creates also for us a similar situation. When we spun out from our former mother company, NXP, we first of all, of course, had to deal with just disentangling. So making sure we get onto our own feet with our own ERP system, which in the end was just a clone of the system landscape that we had before, and then start to look at how we can independently enter digital transformation. The global presence that we have is somewhat added also by the fact that we have fairly special markets that we go into. So semiconductors isn't, let's say, a massive topic that you would usually deal with very large suppliers. There's a lot of special equipment that has special supply chains for spare parts, for the machines and raw materials itself. So you'll find yourself dealing quite often with fairly small suppliers that also maybe don't have those massive existing digital capabilities that some of the big players will have. So when we started, a lot of the challenges in this area were really manual work. I mean, like what Jon was saying. So people were basically doing many parts of the purchasing process on email. Yes, we'd of course have that digital purchase order, but from there you basically go on emails back and forth. You'd still receive paper invoices or similar type that people had to then unenvelope, scan, put into the system for further processing. So indeed, we had a lot of manual effort here, which it doesn't make people happy. It doesn't help throughput times. It doesn't help transparency. And so, that's, I think, indeed a starting position we also started with.
That's a very niche position to be in, I think, especially like you said in semiconductor business, which is not as widespread as many others, especially looking at manufacturing. Yes, I guess semiconductors have had their own specific issues these past couple of years as well. So this digital transformation journey, am I right in thinking that you set up like a supplier portal to manage those processes? Can you tell me a bit about how you did that and sort of what outcomes that delivered for you?
Yeah, so as I said, after kind of becoming independent on our own digital feet, we looked, of course, at topics that we need to act on immediately, also with our business partners in procurement. And the fact of this little automation was one of the key aspects that came on very early in the program. So we studied basically on how and what automation and digitization options we have, what kind of capabilities we require, and what seems to, for our setup, for our use case, make a lot of benefit. So I mentioned that we, in many places, have a rather special supply base. We also have presence in many markets. So we didn't really find a perfect match with some of the large-scale platforms or that have already, of course, the need to have an existing supply base ideally connected to those large platforms. We also found that many of our suppliers are not as digital as we are, so they will not have EDI capabilities, or we just don't have the order volume to warrant having an EDI connection that you also, of course, need to invest in keeping up, maintaining it. So a supplier portal seemed a very interesting idea to make sure that we automate, at least internally, even when our suppliers cannot yet. So, of course, to some extent, we are placing the burden of doing data entry towards the supplier by that. So a clerk on the supplier side now has to click some buttons and fill in some forms instead of the internal administrator that we had do this task before based on the emails. But it certainly helps us to make sure that our processes are more digitized. We have the soonest insight into the data that we can have, because the moment the supplier presses submit, the data is immediately there. There is no further, let's say, lead time to then have somebody process that email. And this has helped us, I think, quite a lot to get indeed more transparency, and also, of course, to some extent, make sure our teams can focus more on the value-added work, which is dealing with the exceptions, and not just cross-pasting the order confirmation one-to-one into the system anymore, or making sure that the invoice is scanned and uploaded. We still get a lot of invoices, let's say, on more classic formats like a PDF document that is now uploaded through the portal, which means it basically goes automated through extraction recognition until the final posting validation in case of any differences, which is almost as good as an EDI for us. It doesn't require the capabilities on the supplier end. So I think in that sense, we've been, as I said, looking at multiple options. The solution we adopted in the end after an RFP, and of course looking at, as I said, again, our special situation, and I think I'd always welcome people to, of course, do a similar analysis, was that such a dedicated, directly added portal on the ERP system is really well tailored for our use case. And so far, we haven't regretted that decision.
Fantastic. I'm glad to hear it. I have a bit of a two-part question for you. Obviously, digital transformation projects themselves are often tough. It's not just a simple thing. So partly, like you mentioned, your team being able to do more value-added work. Are there other outcomes in addition to that for the team? But also, I wanted to ask about the actual process itself and how you made that successful. Not just here's new technology, use it, but getting people to embrace that project.
Yeah, so of course, I mean, I think we already implemented this solution quite a way back, also with at that point, still smaller partner company. So I think, Jon, you may have already mentioned that also you have had a bit of a history being on a smaller business before. I think we had a very open discussion, of course, with the team at that time that provided the portal to help us master this project. Doing a supplier portal more or less individually for your company, I think, of course, it adds some additional challenges. You have to think about the management of the supplier user base, because in the end, they become to some extent users on your internal systems that then need to have a proper secured role and access, that they can really only access and modify what they should be seeing as a supplier. You have to deal with your change and release management fully yourself. I mean, there's nobody to do this for you on top. You have to maybe organize training sessions. You have to have some kind of support mailbox in case people break their access, lose their password, or whatever. Those kind of controls have to be added on top. If that is possible and granted, then, as I said again, we really see that internally we are of course able to much better now see the state of a procurement process with the supplier, and a lot of the non-value adding tasks that were in-house can now be just done either skipped completely or done externally by suppliers. So internally, our process is now very standard. It's always, let's say, fully up to date in the ERP system. And let's say, for example, topics like an order confirmation that you usually would have to get, they are now electronic. So a supplier clerk will accept the orders on the supplier portal. This saves directly back onto our purchase orders. So any, let's say, requirement planner or person that is monitoring order confirmations has this basically instantly, which again, I think greatly helps us to make sure that the teams can work on the real escalation cases. For example, the confirmation being quite a few days later than expected, which means we may have to scramble to either find another supplier that can deliver on more short term, or we can at least make sure that internally steps are made to secure that current stocks last as long as possible, so that we don't run out of a critical supply, for instance. We've step-by-step added for some more processes. As I said, the first scope was really confirmation invoices, so the standard, let's say, purchase to pay process. We by now also run a fair amount of RFP processes via the same portal solution. Again, that has of course been a bit of an initial struggle, because you need to convince not only the internal stakeholders, which had a bit of an ease, of course, to do this, let's say, a little less structured, but also the suppliers, that they now just can't send an email with their offer, but they actually have to go to that portal solution and upload their references there, but also fill in some key fields on the actual quotation document, which in the end still, I think, help us be more structured, and of course also ensure that in any audits that you have, we are seen as quite compliant to standard processes and don't get many flags in the area of procurement transparency.
Thank you so much. That's really, really interesting. And I'm wondering, there's quite a range of different benefits there. Jon, thinking back to, obviously this is quite a niche business area, especially quite complex, involving the sort of manufacturing that Merten's talking about. When it comes to other suppliers, is this typical of the sort of benefits they're getting, or are there other things that in addition to that?
Well, I'd like to think that Merten has experienced most of the benefits, but I guess I might repeat some of the things that he said, but that'll just reinforce that that's what other guys are also seeing. But I guess if you introduce a digital engagement project such as this, then you're going to get a wide range of benefits. We've mentioned some already, but the portal then becomes a central hub essentially for all those interactions between you and your vendors. So that allows the facilitation of the exchange of these documents, and that just immediately eliminates all those paper trails that existed before. And that is completely aligned with another benefit, which is accountability. So as a submission of a document or the update and subsequent approval of data changes is all now happening online. You can see when they were done, who did them. You can remove any he said, she said, I've lost the email, all those kind of issues then go away, and that communication method is centralized where it wasn't before. So that also leads to compliance, because there's a defined process. And if we speak a little bit more specifically to SAP, it's replicating the rules of the procurement process that you've established in the back end. So any changes that suppliers, or the interaction that a supplier has with your process, is already deemed compliant because they have to follow the rules. The portal, cannot deviate from that, where maybe a human can. The portal can surface real-time information about supplier performance. So that relieves, some of the burden of supplier assessment, which can often get pushed down and ignored because it's just too much hassle. But in this scenario, suppliers can see how they're doing. It can be easily digested. It can be a constant feature of the portal in the face. and it just allows them to start policing their own performance, which just means that if they're underperforming, they can see it, it's in the face, and they can do something about it. The old way of working would be they might get a once a month meeting or once a quarter meeting where you try and talk about all the things that went wrong without actually maybe being proactive about improving that performance. And I guess, maybe a common theme is that, the internal administration costs, as Merten said, all those manual things that were going on, they don't bring any value. The suppliers are now doing that workload for you. And maybe we are also introducing features and benefits for the supplier. So it's much easier for them to update purchase orders than it was before. Merten mentioned that some of his suppliers weren't EDI focused, and I suppose it's important to note that EDI doesn't cover every process that you want, but customers who haven't got those things, it was very difficult to update multiple purchase orders. For example, if you had a supply problem with one material that might affect many purchase orders, that was quite an arduous job. Inside the portal, we make that quite easier, just to help vendors want to use the portal as well, and not just say, here's a load of admin you want to do for us. We want to make it a two-way thing, just to make sure that adoption is high. And as we talked around, and again, Merten talked about it, you want to expand the supply chain. You want to go and realize more competitive pricing. You want to reduce the risk of being overly reliant on individual suppliers, but often fear that doing so, you'll have to expand your internal department and reflect to reflect that upscaling in the supply chain. But I think we've heard in practice that doesn't need to be the case, because the portal can manage and deal with the interactions with those extra suppliers on your behalf. So the direct correlation between the number of suppliers and the number of people you need to manage it no longer exists. And that just removes that entire hurdle. And again, that also brings back, once you've done that, the purchasing experts can then concentrate on adding value. Yeah, these are highly qualified, in some cases, purchasing specialists. That's their job, to go and source materials, but they're spending large amounts of time processing data instead of proactively looking for value-added activities. Again, typically what we see in other customers is this data comes in from multiple places in multiple different formats, and you need these guys to pull that all together and ensure it gets updated in SAP in the right places. So again, that obviously is presenting inefficiencies. It introduces a delay in the data being available. Again, we talked about making decisions based on facts. Well, if this data's changed and isn't in the system for a couple of hours, then somebody might have gone and made a purchasing decision based on some out-of-date information. And of course, that process is also mundane. It's not particularly stimulating. It wastes the talents of these people. And we've talked about, the retention of talent in this day and age is really difficult. You need the right people doing the right jobs. They can be negotiating better prices. They can go and identify new materials, potentially alternative materials. They can establish stronger relationships with the suppliers to make sure that, they're invested in being a great supplier to you, etc., etc. And, you can see, I think it's pretty clear and almost common sense that these things are outcomes of this kind of engagement. So again, just to summarize, a lot of the things that we talked about there are exactly what Merten's team has experienced as well.
Okay, thank you. For myself, for anyone who is eager to know or maybe not as familiar with it, could you let us know a little bit about how the portal actually works? So say you have perhaps, I know, say 10,000 suppliers or something like that, and then how do you, on the tech side of things, as you said, you're a tech guy.
I was a tech guy.
No, with those expertise, with the tech guy hat on, can you give us a bit of info about how it actually works on a daily basis?
Yeah, I guess so. If for those of interest, if we focus a bit on the technology, we talked about SAP a little bit, but I guess NTT as a business, we're always, on top of everything to do with SAP. And what we try and do is identify areas where we can bring value, extra value, I guess, to SAP's existing capabilities, just leading us to get more return on investment that you've already made in the SAP portfolio. And this vendor portal effectively is just one example of where we've done just that. So it's been designed specifically to leverage the SAP procurement capabilities, to extend them further, to provide additional benefits to both the customer and the vendor, of which I've touched on a little bit. But the core component of this product is delivered directly within the SAP environment, just ensuring that it's fit for purpose. It allows us to securely share the SAP native data and processes to the vendors via effectively a user-friendly online platform. So amongst other things, it just allows them to digest that key information, respond to it in a single location in real time. So for example, when a purchase order is raised in SAP, the vendor can view and react to that in the portal, whether that's to just acknowledge receipt, to confirm delivery dates, or propose changes to delivery dates, for example. And just due to that seamless alignment between the portal and SAP, those changes are reflected immediately in real time. Merten said as soon as he pressed the button, it's there, and that is true. And it just, again, makes sure that anybody who's viewing that information, all those stakeholders, can make informed and ultimately better decisions as a result. So I guess maybe a little more technically then, it's delivered as an SAP certified Delta edition to the ERP or S4 system. So it works in both, but it's essentially just delivered as a transport into the system. So it sits alongside the existing master data, alongside the existing procurement configured processing, just to make sure that we're reusing rather than reinventing everything by integration. So that's how we ensure there's a single source of the truth and it's all in real time. So this appeases IT because it runs on the same infrastructure as the ERP system. There's no additional disaster recovery or availability considerations, the security and the scalability is looked after by the SAP standards, and there's no new support or technical knowledge requirements either. So I guess what I'm saying is it's completely aligned with the SAP landscape. So it's not like a third-party system. This is where we've got some unique ISP here. Yes, SAP's got their own products. This is different. We've delivered it to try and bring much higher return on investment at a much more economic value. I'll leave that there for now. So again, just in summary, it's an application where your vendors can log on, they can self-serve, and you can work with them in a more economic and efficient way. So it covers all the procure-to-pay processes that exist in ERP or S4. So that's the management of purchase orders, the management of the order book, the quality notifications features, if you use that, the accounts payable functionality, everything, I guess, that you would consider transactions in that space in SAP. The portal allows those things to be exposed to the vendors directly. And again, without going too much more detail and taking this over with a technical description, the details of what's included in this portal, readily available. There's lots of literature, there's demos available. If anyone wants to see it, then that's fairly easy to sort out.
Thank you. I just have one last question for you, Jon. It might be a bit of a cheeky one. But bearing in mind the tool, as you said, and the benefits it brings, and the better visibility and access to real-time data, like if we're looking ahead into, obviously I'm sure you don't have a crystal ball there, but if you did, what do you think the future looks like for procurement and supply chain? And also, like, how would this, do you think, be a benefit to people?
Yeah, that's difficult without the crystal ball. But I guess, like we said in the top of the cast, that I think it's reasonably fair to assume that the future will continue to be a challenge. There's things that we know, and of course, many challenges that will arise will be a surprise. That's the very nature of the world that we live in at the moment. But what we do know is that improving process, extending the use of technology will help us deal with those challenges. and they're helping us deal with the things that we know today. That is evident. We do hope, everybody hopes, that some of the disruption that's been caused by the recent events will reduce over time, and that should ease some current, some of the current pressures on supply chains. However, I think some of the changes that have been brought about will be much more permanent. I guess what Putin's going to do tomorrow is difficult to predict, but what we can see is, our work, our staff, our people, they're not necessarily working from permanent office locations since the panic. Some may never return, some may take a hybrid model, but that in itself highlights the importance, I guess, across all areas of leveraging technology to do the job. So I guess if we apply that specifically to procurement, it is vital that all the interested parties, so that's everybody in our purchasing teams, everybody working for the vendors, understand what is expected of them and each other. And they do have the means at their disposal to deliver against that expectancy, regardless of where they're working and in what time zone, and they can respond in a timely manner. So, yeah, we contribute to the solution, I guess, or the solution to these problems by providing that online platform, breaks down the communication barriers, provides a uniform approach to adopt processes, and just maintains that tight collaboration. I guess the continued use of technology, that's got to be, I think, the theme, will allow people to work smarter, work more efficiently, maintain those relationships with vendors. So as we go through difficult times, you go through it together, and a bond between you and your vendors is important to get through these things, and ultimately benefit everybody involved. So I guess, yeah, in summary, procurement remains a challenging environment for everybody to work in. We need to help them, as a software vendor ourselves, but I think we can help them by fast tracking technology that we already have at our fingertips to deploy those solutions that they need today, and I'm sure they'll need in the coming years as well.
Mm-hmm. Lovely, thank you. And Merten, to come to you finally as well. Similar question. What do you see as the landscape moving forward for your industry? I know you said you're not directly in procurement, but where you sit, but also the sector that you actually work in. What do you think is lying ahead for you?
Yeah, I think I can echo the question. I mean, it's sometimes very hard to predict. We see, of course, still semiconductors being on the news quite a lot for shortages and all kinds of situations, but also our area is usually quite heavily affected by ups and downs. So you basically never really know what's going to be the actual market situation next year. And I mean, that also a lot depends, of course, on the surroundings. If people stop buying many of the new gadgets, we immediately, especially in standard semiconductors business, we'll see that effect. So it's hard to say. But looking, of course, at helping the procurement department continuing to master the challenges, I think indeed, I mean, what Jon said, it'll never help to have hurt to have that good transparency, that good insight. We're currently mostly looking at also now re-standardizing, re-platforming our digital core solution, which means the ERP system, transforming it, moving over to S/4HANA, which is, I think, big among most of the SAP companies at the moment, SAP user companies this moment. The portal will come along with us on this journey. So we'll keep on using that solution also against the new backend system. Of course, we hope, I think, with the new backend also to even more move towards this exception management instead of, let's say, just basic ticking of things in lists, as was the classic use case or user scheme on older ERP systems. Yeah, there's certainly going to be more features. There's still quite a wish list that I have when I talk to my business partners that they constantly come back to us with. But of course, we'll, I think, tick them off step by step. And yeah, well, I think we hope, of course, to put quite a few of these topics into that portal solution that is already there.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. At this point, we've got quite a few questions in, so at this point, I'm going to move over to the Q&A. For anybody who is watching live, you can keep sending them as we're going along. So please do this fine, but we'll work through what we have so far. So first off, is the supplier portal reliant on SAP Ariba? Ariba is very focused on large enterprises. Is that also true of the portal? Is this one for you, Jon?
I'll take that, yes. No is the answer. Ariba is a separate product. Obviously, we get the Ariba question quite a lot because it is in the SA portfolio. But let me position it a little bit different. Architecturally, it's completely different. Ariba is a separate product that integrates. This vendor portal sits within ERP, so you don't need a separate system. I guess the easiest way to describe it is that this portal is a light version of Ariba. Yeah, so it's focused, as I said before, on identifying gaps in the SAP backend product set. And we see this as a much more cost-effective solution for those customers who would use a subset of the much bigger and expensive Ariba solution. Yeah, think of it like that. To answer the question, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's a second part there of is it more effective in larger organizations?
Well, Ariba does different things. Ariba also has things like a marketplace functionality, where you haven't got fixed supply. So you might ask people to bid on an item or for the procurement of that product. Whereas this product is more focused on, I guess, direct supply, where you are raising purchase orders on a known vendor. So there's lots of things that Ariba would do, which is not covered by ERP. And what we're trying to do is stay aligned with that. So in my team, I look after Ariba as well. So they're both my responsibility. And it's our job to recommend the right products and solutions for customers. And without question, if Ariba is the right solution, then that's what I would propose. Yeah. However, it is clear in the marketplace that it isn't the right solution for everybody. And therefore, there's an alternative which can be a much better fit for customers.
Thank you. Very good answer. Thank you. This is probably more for Merten. It's around vendor management. How much you said about when your suppliers aren't necessarily on the same process as you, or maybe not as advanced as you. But when it comes to inviting them to use a portal, have you had any pushback or resistance at all? And if so, I mean, obviously we're dealing with a lot of different companies, but how have you approached that?
It happens. I mean, of course, you won't always hit open doors when you ask the supplier to maybe also, to some extent, change their process in favor of ours, because they have maybe some kind of an automated system that just pushes out a PDF document in the background automatically. I think we've had a fairly good adoption rate with many suppliers, also by focusing on the ease of it, to some extent by mandating it. We insist on order confirmations in those steps. You still have a certain percentage of suppliers that don't follow, and they may have also the market position that they can just say no. And I think then it's up to, I guess, in those cases, being somewhat flexible and still not completely shut the old way down, still being able to respond in a more classic way. And it's all about percentage of effort getting removed, maybe not about the completeness of effort removed. And I think you'd see this with any kind of digital solution that you will ask people to come on. Also, the big procurement solutions, you'll always have that adoption question, and people may just say, nah, we're on another one, and we don't want another one to manage for us.
And then what happens then in that situation? Do you sort of just look elsewhere?
Well, I'd say initially of course we approach suppliers by so-called kind of invitation emails. We make them register. You monitor the response rate, and step by step, at some point they basically would get called by our sourcing manager and be kindly asked We make supplier portal usage part of our vendor assessment. So of course, if you use the portal actively, you basically score good on that question, which gives you an overall better supplier recognition rate. So it's I think the usual options that you have as a purchasing organization to tame your supply base. But you always have those stragglers that you still need because you're dependent on them, and then at some point you may have to give up.
Thank you. That's another part. In terms of building these closer relationships. So when you are removing some of the admin and when you are removing some of these repetitive tasks, or perhaps that process of negotiating and managing invoices, how has the portal helped you to enhance those relationships that you have with suppliers?
Yeah, it's bi-directional. I mean, when you, of course, the supplier can be very sure that we have certainly accepted their invoice. If they are able to, for example, upload their electronic PDF version to the portal, we'll immediately give them a confirmation ID so they know it's been submitted. I think this helps them be much more sure that the payment will also be on time. We have a functionality in there where they can see, let's say, their balance sheet on our system, so they can exactly see which invoices are in the system, are registered, are still under review or already approved, which ones will be on which payment run to some extent, or which ones have already been paid or sent for payment. So we're also helping them remove, let's say, complexity by having to chase things that we have to do. For example, an invoice that didn't get paid on time. So this gives, I think, both parties indeed some help. One of the backlog items that I see at the moment is also making the portal a collaboration tool, which means you basically even move your conversations and your communication to some extent there, but we haven't looked into this in detail yet. So when it comes to, let's say, more individual items, you still go by an email or a phone call, and that also should never be completely replaced by the portal. I mean, meetings are important, at least virtual meetings are important, and I guess supply-based management will always have a good part of that too.
Absolutely, thank you. I have another question here. So 5 years ago, we were looking at supplier consolidation, adoption of new technology, long-term gains. Now there seems to be a stronger focus on wider market competition, rationalization of services when it comes to reducing costs. Do you feel suppliers recognize this and have adapted their own strategic focus to meet the changing customer needs? I'm not sure if that would be a wider question for you, Jon.
I can have a go. I mean, I guess, I'm probably not that involved in those kind of things with the customers to answer that fully, but I guess the focus on customers is the most important thing here. But I'm not going to answer that incredibly well. I'm honest. I don't think I'm close enough to it with the changing strategies. When it comes to us, what we have is a strategy that they want to adopt, and what we have is technology that helps them adopt that strategy. It needs to probably be one of my procurement guys that would answer that question. Sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. Thank you so much. Another final one here for Merten. How long did it actually take you to implement the product? From initiating that decision to you've made that choice, and then actually getting it up and running. What was the timeline for you?
So I would say we probably took about a year from first RFI to first basic feature set go live, probably 6 months to take, all the decisions, do the RFP, get most of the paperwork done, set up the contracts, and then about 6 months for the building and testing. But that was quite a few years ago. I guess the product has also matured to some extent. We, of course, had to set up a few of the surrounding infrastructure elements. So maybe, Jon, to add to your statement before, there's maybe one additional competence that you need as an IT provider. You need to, of course, to some extent expose your ERP system to the internet, which requires possibly to set up a separate host that bridges only the selected data and makes sure that you don't expose the full system, because that's usually not intended nowadays. I mean, security is even more adamant than it was years ago. So that part may also require you to set up a certain system that handles a load balancing or a proxy into the internet. So those kind of infrastructure points also had to be taken, which led to the project time.
Yeah.
We've since then, I think, pushed increments of functionality every couple of months, depending on releases, of course, to the product, which give us new standard functionality, but also related to some feature enhancements that we've worked out together with the team in kind of customer projects, individual projects.
Yeah, I guess I could probably add to that as well. So if I strip out, obviously there's some internal project governance that happens, which is different for every customer. But I guess to give people on the call an idea of how big this project might be, I guess because it's a pre-packaged solution, it has a tight fit to the SAP backend configuration. Therefore, as standard, it's around 2 months, let's say, of actual implementation time, I guess, or the deploy phase, if you like. So I guess, some customers have enhancement requirements. Like Merten said, maybe the infrastructure isn't quite ready for the exposure to the outside world. So there's maybe some peripheral things that are outside that makes it a bit of how long is a piece of string. But it is unusual for it to be massively different for that, because we are talking about exposing standard SAP processes that already exist. And therefore, in my head, I would think, outside of customer specific things, it's a 2 to 3 month project.
Thank you so much. We're just about reaching time to wrap up. So before we do that, I thought if we could just come to each of you and see if there's one takeaway from today that you would like to share with the audience, or one key thing that you think they should bear in mind when doing this type of transformation and what it can deliver. I can ask you first, Jon.
You're putting us on the spot, but I guess I guess just to say, look, there's many customers, there's many procurement professionals out there who are experiencing very similar challenges as you are. Talk to us or people like us so we can share what we're doing to help them tackle that. Maybe give you some ideas or avenues to explore. But ultimately, just to reinforce that technology can help you. There are options out there as well, not just SAP options that you're probably already aware of, that are more economical, are faster to get up and running. And that is especially if you've got that SAP backend, of course. So yeah, just there's things out there that you might not know about. Speak to us, we can help. Thank you.
And Merten, do you have one sort of lesson learned in the process, or a bit of advice for anyone watching?
Well, I'd certainly say if you don't have any capability to do something like a supplier portal, and of course, indeed, not a very small focused supplier base that you can basically run on EDI, then it's certainly, I think, worth doing a study on it. See what product fits, what kind of solution will fit. So in that sense, yeah, I'd certainly say this has been one of the big changes for our procurement process. So yeah, it's certainly worth investing.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that with us, Merten, and for your expertise, Jon. That's wonderful. And we will wrap today's session there. Thank you everyone for joining in, or for if you're rewatching this, for the coming back. I think we covered an awful lot of ground there. I hope we reached all of your questions as well. Apologies if we didn't get to them. We had quite a few there at the end. If you do want to reach out to either Jon or Merten, do contact us, let us know. I'm sure they'd be very happy to continue the conversation. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your day, and goodbye for now from us.